Good Wednesday to you. Glad to have you back with us this morning, this Wednesday morning. Invite you, if you'd like, to be able, if you're able to tune in with us tonight at 6:30. We'll be back here on Facebook Live, doing, I guess, virtual prayer meeting as much as possible. We've been walking through the little book of Jude on Wednesday nights, so that'll be here tonight at 6:30. Try to get it on Facebook and YouTube together, but I haven't I haven't quite mastered that technology, but I'm working on it. There's something I'm not doing right. I end up getting on one or the other. But remember that. Also, you should be able, if you download our church's app on Google or Apple under Share Faith is the name of the app. It'll come up and ask you to search for which ministry. You tell it PGBC. That'll fill in. It'll come up automatically, PGBC-Concord. Choose that. And then you can choose the ministry icon. It'll have our logo on it. And there is a tab there for live streaming. You should be able to get that there live at 6:30 as well. So a couple options for you to join us tonight. And you can use those same options any other time, but for Wednesday night, just to let you know those are available. All right, grab your Bible or your phone or your iPad or your Kindle or whatever else, whatever other technology you may have. And let's look at Psalm 13. This is a psalm that probably most of us can really identify with. And so David is going to talk about trials and tribulations and dealing with some problems that he has in his life. One of the toughest, one of the hardest parts for that, I was going to say my job, but for that matter, any Christian, one of the hardest things we do is to try to deal and explain trials, tribulations, when dealing with people, trying to talk to them about the Lord when they're in the receiving line at the funeral home or in waiting rooms at the hospital. It's very, very difficult. We like to, we want an answer. We want an answer, and we want it right now. And David kind of is what we have in this 13th Psalm. Is David kind of in that situation? Again, just the words that publisher or someone is stuck in here on my laptop above the 13th Psalm is David prays for intervening grace. More than once, we have all looked for intervening grace as we seem to be waiting on God. Many people of this psalm, again, the psalm doesn't tell us, the superscription doesn't tell us, but the majority of people believe that David wrote this psalm while being pursued by Saul. Just kind of, if you're not familiar, just give you a little background. God became displeased with Saul and had David already chosen and anointed to be the next king. And Saul became very jealous of David because David was a great warrior. The people were praising David, and Saul became very jealous. And so it's estimated, we don't exactly know that for somewhere approximately 12 years, David, maybe a little less, but David was on the run from Saul. And so the belief is that this psalm was written during that time. Imagine David's mindset. David has been chosen. He has already been anointed to be the next king of Israel. Now, David has not done anything to move towards taking that position. He hadn't tried to overthrow Saul. He hasn't tried to assume the throne, but he has been chosen to be king. He is best friends with Saul's son Benjamin. He has led great battles and won great victories in the name of Israel. But to be to know you've already been chosen as king, and yet Saul is, and to know that you've done nothing, but Saul is pursuing you and wanting you dead. So I think we can understand a good idea of where David is when he says these opening words in verse 1, "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord?" All of us at times have probably said something along those lines. Lord, how long? We're the kind of people who pray, Lord, grant me patience, but I want it right now. David, how long? And again, look at those words. How long will thou forget me? So in David's way of thinking, in David's current situation, he was completely out of God's thinking. He wasn't in God's plans at this point, and so David is bothered by that, and so he's going to cry out to God. And so this psalm helps us to understand how to handle those times in our life when it seems like that God's got us on hold. I don't know about you, but one of the things I struggle with more than anything is being put on hold. I have that. Well, sometimes we feel like God has put us on hold. So I want to give you, as we go through this psalm, several things that David does, that David shows us about how to deal, how to get through those times when it seems like God has abandoned, God has forsaken, God is ignoring us. And we're going to see that here in these opening verses. One of the first things we do is, again, as we've seen in previous verses, we go tell God, "How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord, forever?" I think that those words right there tell us what David's mindset was as he wrote this. "How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul?" David says, "How long can I not talk to you? How long have I got to talk to myself? Having sorrow in my heart daily. How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" And so David is just pouring out his heart to God about his current situation. And he just is giving God the good, the bad, the ugly of his situation. And if you haven't learned anything through these first 12 Psalms and 2 verses, my prayer is that before we get to the end of the book of Psalms, all 150 of them is my goal, is that you will learn from the psalmist that it is okay to tell God. It is okay to pour out your heart to God. I mean, think about it. He already knows. If I'm feeling frustrated, I might as well go ahead and tell God I'm frustrated. He already knows how I feel. He He's omniscient. He knows everything. And I don't think God means for us to hold those kind of things in. It's not healthy. It's not wise. And so, again, there's a manner in which to do it. You don't go shaking your fist in the face of God. But God's big. He's tough. And so David coming to him and just venting and just unloading here. We don't see David get struck down. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to learn and to get into our hearts and lives to know that it is okay to tell God what is on our hearts and minds. And so God allows that. He gives us that example over and over. And so David goes to God, and look what he's in verse 1 and 2. How long? How long? Verse 2 starts with how long, and we've got 4 how longs in 2 verses. David is certainly, telling God about his situations. David is frustrated. David is angry. David is discouraged. David is depressed. David is, pretty well fill in the blank. David is, and as long as it isn't joyful, happy, glad, some word like that, it would fit. David is to that point. Look what he says. He feels like God has forgotten him. He doesn't. And notice what he says in verse 1. He doesn't say, God, have you forgotten me? He says, God, you have. He doesn't say if or maybe. He says, how long will you forget me? Lord, you have forgotten me. David has come to the point in his life where he believes that God has completely forgotten him, that God has forsaken him. How long will you hide your face from me? David, again, he believes that God has forgot him and left him on the backside of nowhere. He feels like God has abandoned him. Again, when David's talking about hiding, for the people of that time, that idea of your face, that was like the very favor of God. How long will you, basically David says, how long you hide your face from me? This goes from being blessed by God to literally being cursed by God. And so David, that's where he finds himself and how he feels. How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? And so David says, Lord, I'm to the point where I don't know what to do. I just basically, I talk to myself. I have sorrow in my heart. He is mentally and emotionally exhausted. He is, he's moved to the point of negative, defeated thinking. He's afraid. How long will our enemy be exalted over me? David says, Lord, how long will my enemy continue to win? David says, I feel like every day I go out to battle and I get whooped. I don't know how many of you. I hope not. I hope you don't feel that way today. But it's easy to get to that, get into that predicament where we are that beaten down and feel like God has abandoned us. And so sometimes, just like David, we get in that, and it's I talked about this in a previous psalm. Probably most of you that are getting up every morning and watching these videos, you know better. I know better. David knew better. But sometimes the battle the fight gets so intense that it feels like God has just, He's turned His back on us. Even when those thoughts, they go completely contrary to everything we know about God. And sometimes that even just kind of makes it worse, because we have those thoughts, we know better, and then we start feeling guilty for having those thoughts. And then, and we know better, and we start feeling guilty, and we're almost like a ping pong ball. We're just back and forth. And so what does Paul tell us in Philippians? Paul tells us to focus our mind on what's true. And so to start with, we know it's impossible for God to forget us. We know that He won't forsake you. He promises in His Word, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. He promises in these very same Psalms to be a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. It's funny how we can sit and look at those two Psalms, or these two verses, and we can look at those verses and we can see David. We can think of people who are in that situation. We can remember times when we have been in that situation. And we can look at those two verses and imagine for a moment, if you can with me, let's do we'll kind of take a little exercise here. If you were David's friends, and David was talking to you, and he said to you, "Man, I feel like God has forgotten me," what would you say to him? If you feel like David's your friend, and he said to you, "God has forsaken me," what would you say to him? You're David's friend, and like verse 2, he says, "I'm discouraged, I'm depressed." What would you say to him? Verse 2, he says, my enemies are winning constantly. What would you say to him? Each one of us reading these two verses know better. We know that God doesn't forget us. We know that He doesn't forsake us. We know that, as the New Testament tells us, no weapon formed against us will prosper. We know that He says, even when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. We know that, and yet we allow ourselves to get caught in this same way of thinking. I think it's a lot like maybe the undertow, the undercurrent at the beach. You're out there and you're in the water and you almost don't even realize it. You don't realize how the current is pulling you until you look up and you've been drug out into deeper water. Sometimes it's running sideways. You look out and you went into the ocean right in front of the apartment or whatever you're staying in, and you look up and you're halfway to Murrells Inlet. That's the way these kind of thoughts do us. They just slowly, overcome us and slowly take over our way of thinking. I want to leave you this morning with a verse from the New Testament. Paul wrote to the Corinthians, "We are troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Cast down, but not destroyed." Folks, I hope that'll help you today. I don't know who that's for. I don't know who these two verses are for. But I want you to know something today, that God is still on your side. He has not forgotten you. He has not forsaken you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. He's a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. When my father and mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. I am cast down, but not destroyed, Paul said. you can make it through today with God's grace and God's help. If you need somebody to talk to, if you got a problem you can't seem to work out, feel free to call me. Feel free to email me, whatever. Be glad to talk to you. But I'm going to tell you again that simple answer. I am cast down but not destroyed. If you've put your faith in Jesus Christ, greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. Hope you have a great day today. We'll see you back here tomorrow.